I would like to introduce our panelists. Next to me is Dilruba Haider. She is the coordinator of UN Women in Bangladesh. She is a person with 23 years of experience in the field of disaster risk reduction, climate change, and gender. And I would have the next speaker, which is Anna Mitch. She is a director, community empowerment, integrated development and gender justice, and diversity at BRAC. She has almost 25 years of experience working with various programs on gender justice. And we have someone with us from our neighboring country, Nepal, Sangeeta Raja Maji, who is a senior professor and director of South Asian Foundation, also a professor of literature and on gender studies at Asian University for Women, a Fulbright scholar. I think you have a lot of things in your achievement. A scholar who's been with the Fund Fellowship. She has been in the teaching for 30 years, especially in the context of gender. I welcome all the three panelists to this session now. Before we start, we have a small video for all of you.
This is a story about the women in Bangladesh. A story that you might not have heard, but a story that promises to inspire.
গ্রামের জনগোষ্ঠীর মধ্যে অর্ধেক নারী অর্ধেক পুরুষ আমাদেরও মত প্রকাশ করার অধিকার আছে 2010 সালে ব্রাকের পল্লী সমাজ আমি যোগ দিই তো 2011 সালে আমি সেখানে সভাপ্রধান হিসেবে নির্বাচিত হই তারপর থেকে আমি আমার পল্লী সমাজের অনেক কাজকর্ম বা অনেক গ্রামের উন্নয়নমূলক কাজকর্ম তার পাশাপাশি নারীদের অ্যাসিড নিক্ষেপ বাল্য বিবাহ এই বিষয়গুলো আমি ধাপে ধাপে তাদেরকে নিয়ে কাজ করে আসতেছি এই গ্রামে একটা বাল্য বিবাহ হতে লাগছিল পল্লীর আম্মাকে অনেক বুঝাই কিন্তু সে কোনোভাবে বুঝতে চায় না
আমি অনেক ছোট ছিলাম আব্বাজানের সাথে আমার বাবা মা বিয়ে ঠিক করলো আমি বিয়ে করতে চাইনি মেয়ে তো আমরা মেয়ে মানুষ সবকিছুই সহ্য করা লাগে সবাই বিয়েটা মেনে নিয়েছিল হঠাৎ করে একদিন রাতে ফারজানা আপার কয়েকজন মুরব্বী এসে আমার বাবা আমাকে বোঝানোর পরে আমার বিয়েটা ভেঙে গেছে
Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of child marriage in the world, where today 1 in 3 Bangladeshi girls aged 15 to 19 are married. Things don't get better as these young brides grow up either. 2 of 3 Bangladeshi women experience some sort of violence during their lifetime. Rape, domestic violence, acid attacks, trafficking. Only 32% of these cases are reported.
আপনি যে বাল্য বিবাহের বিষয়টা এটাও আমি একসময় অনেক জোর দিয়ে অনেক কাজ করছি কিন্তু সেটা আমার পুরোটাই সফলতা অর্জন হয়েছে আমার পল্লী সমাজ থেকে আইনের সহযোগিতা নিয়ে পুলিশের মাধ্যমে তারপর সে বিয়েটা বন্ধ করে দেওয়া হয় 2-3 গ্রাম মিলে একটি পল্লী সমাজ গঠিত হয় সেখানে 7 জন সদস্য নিয়ে পল্লী সমাজটা গঠন করা হয় সেই 7 জন সদস্যের মাঝখান থেকে নির্বাচন করে 11 জন কার্যকরী কমিটির সদস্য গঠিত হয়
Initiated by BRAC in 1998, Holy Samaj Initiative now covers 55 out of 64 districts in Bangladesh, amounting to a total of 12,350 Holy Samaj. This means that roughly 740,000 rural women all over Bangladesh are now in charge of self-governing their communities. Holy Samaj members set their own agendas and also mobilize their own community resources. BRAC is there to provide information and support. In addition to stopping violence and discrimination against women, the members are also involved in development initiatives like roads and bridge construction, the local power structure, ensuring access to local government resources and services. BRAC, join the world's biggest family.
Thank you very much for that film. I think it set the tone to look into vulnerabilities of women. Whenever there's a natural disaster, very, very often, there's a lot of situation that creates an increased vulnerability of women. very often we have seen, our neighboring countries like India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, the numbers of natural calamities has always bring situation for women to get into unsafe cross-border migration very often that leads to human trafficking. The most important aspect that we have seen that, of course, women are more resilient to fight back. But at the same time, the abuses, the situation of abuses that is happening to women because of the situation of disasters and climate change is an important element that one needs to look through innovative ways, how good practices across these countries can actually address the issue more collectively across borders, more systematically, and also looking at the fact that resilience cannot just be a pilot initiative in any of these countries, but rather an initiative which is holistic in nature that has an impact not just on the most immediate of addressing the legal situation for these women, but the larger impact of economic. Now, with that, I know all the panelists here has so much of experience, and I think the session is very short to actually address the larger context issue. But my first question to my first panelist, Anna Mitch, is how might we build a gender lens into disaster response? How would this look like in the context of Bangladesh? Since you have been working in Bangladesh, you are in BRAC, and with this many years, how does you see that?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. At the beginning of which our moderator said that though we know that natural calamities, disasters, these actually affect the entire community. But due to discriminatory situation of the women in the community, they, particularly women, children, and sometimes the most vulnerable groups, in our cases like indigenous communities and other excluded communities, they actually face different kind of experiences, and also the impact of this kind of disasters or natural calamities is different. And in many cases, we see that, these are the vulnerable communities who are affected most, and in numbers, if we see the high numbers, they die during any kind of disaster. This is one kind of scenario, and as our moderator also mentioned, they not only die during this disaster time or after disaster, during post-recovery time, there are a number of gender-based violence also increases, which we can actually see from our experiences. So this is the reality, and in our work, particularly if I talk about BRAC's program, because BRAC has widespread activities throughout the country, and particularly we organize women groups, and we raise awareness on different social issues, including different kind of injustices. So we actually took that opportunity to orient these grassroots women around this disaster preparedness. And if you see the numbers, we have thousands and thousands platforms at the grassroots level. If I speak about the Polli Samaj, which we have seen in the video, we have more than 12,000 such women's platform. And I think the process we have started to orient these grassroots platforms is in maybe during 2011, and I can recall the number, about 50,000 women's group members are trained on disaster preparedness, and also there were several follow-up sessions. And we have seen then after this kind of training, we have seen that these women actually came forward to take leadership role in orienting other community people, especially in the disaster-prone area, in the coastal belt. And if I speak that some example, during this 2013 Mohashen, we have seen the number of women, they actually identified the most vulnerable people in the community, like pregnant, elderly, and children. And together they actually put their hand to evacuate those families first. Then later on, when the disaster went on, then definitely they took the responsibility of actually going back to their households. And similarly, this trained group, we have seen that they are active in connecting these vulnerable people with different kind of services as well. So the point I wanted to make here that if we actually consider or use this gender lens from the very beginning, like from early warning to different phases of recovery, then definitely we can actually address the issues of discrimination and definitely those who are affected. And we have seen that it works. Not only that, I wanted to mention another example. If we sensitize this group, we have seen that number of women actually took leadership role in the local communities, like very local level, we have union parishads. So these trained women actually went to the union parishad asking where is the disaster preparedness committee. So they actually asked that kind of initiative, and they became part of those kind of committees and helping the local government structure and helping the most affected people during the disasters to help the adequate services and actually going back in their normal life. So to me, it seems that if we really keep in mind the gender lens, whatever we do, particularly we can take the opportunity of disaster preparedness activities, and also if any disaster happens, then later on when we plan our recovery plans, in those stages, if we really use this gender lens, definitely we can actually help a lot to build in resilience.
Dilruba Haider, do you think we need to explicitly think about resilience to disaster and how we tackle gender equalities?
Thank you, Hasina. I think, first of all, we need to understand that or recognize that without gender equality, resilience can't be built. That has to be the starting point, the premise. And I think resilience actually could be, building resilience could actually contribute also to gender equality. Because so gender inequality means that the women don't have access and control over resources. Women's decision-making power isn't there. Women don't have, the mobility is limited. So if we want to build resilience of the community, affected community, then those are the things that we need to address. And the moment we start addressing those things, we are actually increasing gender equality. So it's sort of a, you increase resilience, you also, increase gender equality. And if you increase gender equality, you are contributing to building resilience. So it's sort of there's a very close link between the two. Just to give you an example, it's a very interesting, and I think a lot of people know about this project. In Uganda, USAID was having a project. It's well known as Vanilla Bean Project. I don't know whether people know about this project. It's very interesting. The government of Uganda had this agricultural program, Vanilla Bean Production. And the first year, and it was like the women were the sort of direct beneficiaries of the program. So the first year, the production was very good. It was a multi-year program. And then after second year, the production started going down. And the program implementers couldn't find what was the problem with the program. There, a lot of assessment went in. Agricultural experts went and tried to assess what was the problem. Was there any problem with the input, the environment, the climate, and all that? And they couldn't find anything. So then they wanted to look at it from the socioeconomic point of view, and the gender experts went in and tried to assess what was the problem. To cut the story short, the problem was the program didn't take into account the realities of the women. So it was always because the women were targeted, so the women were responsible for taking care of the vanilla bean field, tend to the plants. But when the crop came, it was the husbands who took it to the market and bring back the money, and the money was not being handed over to the women. So the women were not taking the benefit of the income. So the women lost interest because it was heavily, labor intensive. The women had to use a lot of their time in addition to their regular activities that they were doing in terms of the household chores and others. So the women didn't have any interest, and so the entire that project failed. So unless we understand the dynamics of men and women within a household and in the community, and therefore design our program accordingly, then there's every possibility that whatever we are designing and implementing, the development program, and DRR program and an adaptation program for that matter, it will not succeed. So therefore, it's very important to address that dynamics and the gender equality issues or the gender dynamics in families and societies. Also, another example is about the need for gender equality to increase resilience, is that there have been a lot of studies. In Myanmar, after 2008 Cyclone Nargis, the studies showed that the casualty among men and women was 60% of the dead were women. Whereas in 1991 cyclone in Bangladesh, there are various reports have suggested that the 90% of the dead were women and children. Now, we know that Myanmar, is another poor country, but the gender equation situation in Myanmar is far better than in Bangladesh. So, and this is one example, but if we look around, we will have many more examples showing that the societies or the countries where gender equality situation is better, in terms of the casualty for instance, is the discrimination in casualty. It's horrible to say that, but there we see the difference. So which means that gender equality is very important in order to make sure that from that perspective, it's not the best way of looking at it, but that's it. Also, I think so which means that in resilience program we need to address gender equality, and to make sure that we reap the maximum benefit out of our interventions. Another example is that if we let me give you another example from a project that we have been doing. UN Women have been implementing a gender and climate change program for the last 4 years, and one of our activity was supporting climate vulnerable women, and these are we worked with 20,000 women, and all of these were the poorest of the poor women. And the livelihood support we provided, there was some phenomenal, examples that we saw. Once I have to tell you a story of one woman, and she is from Mongla, and that's Sundarban periphery area. And she received livelihood support under this project, which was a tiny amount of money given to her along with skills training, disaster preparedness training. But for the livelihood support, we gave her a tiny amount of money to set up a grocery shop in front of her household. Now, this lady, within a year of this support, has now set up a bigger shop in the local market and selling from tea up to biscuits, pens, notepad, even to petrol in that local market. And she works in her shop from 6 a.m. in the morning till 10 p.m. at night, and she's doing it on her own. Her husband works somewhere else. He collects fuel wood from Sundarban area, and he earns much less than her. But there are numbers of interesting lessons from this story, but one angle I want to share is that the husband, because she comes to open the shop at 6 a.m. in the morning, the husband takes care of the kids. So that the 2 sons she has, he feeds the kids and sends them off to school and also arranges for the lunch and all that because she doesn't have the time. She opens the shop at 6 a.m. because she wants to sell tea to the men who returns from the mosque early morning. So here we see the changes in the, in the relationship between husband and wife and the responsibilities of household chores. And this has been possible because, because the woman, her name is Mahira, she is earning the money, and she has been and she and her husband has been within this program of resilience, building, and has been attending training and all that. So we see these, finer changes into the relationship and the responsibilities. So I think, therefore, it's extremely important that we address gender issues for success of resilience program. I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have our next speaker, Sangeeta Raj Mahaji. My question to you is, bringing women into the formal workplace, including into position of leadership and decision making, is a clear component of success. How can we achieve this? Where do you see this progress? I think we just had Dilruba mentioning about economic there and that kind of leadership. I think the joining point is that kind of leadership encourages women to have more access and independence on economic, and then subsequently having men participation in looking after the house, which becomes a part of gender equality.
All right. Good afternoon. First of all, this is a gender lens panel, and I would have loved it if there had been two men here with us, right? It's not a women's lens, it's gender lens. So, it would have been very good to have at least 2 men with us here. And I'd like to start off by saying that climate change is not gender neutral, right? When I say that, definitely, everybody is impacted, but then it's men and women, they are impacted differently, right? So how are they impacted differently? That's the question. And because of the roles that they are given to in the society, right? The socio-economic, the hierarchical structures, the power structures, the access and control, these are the things. And it's not just in the rural areas, it's also in the urban centers that, we're talking about access to and control of opportunities and other economic accesses, let's say. So basically, when we talk about leadership roles, or when we talk about resiliences, so, it's not just bottom up or top down, right? We have to, at the policy making, we say, okay, there has to be gender inclusion, right? Or women's inclusion, women's participation. But then, when you come to the bottom, don't you have to work towards raising the awareness of these people? Because it's traditionally women are, in a patriarchal society, traditionally women are secondary, right? They always come second because of whatever, especially in South Asia. So, so therefore, they are what we say vulnerable to change. But then how do we increase, or how do we better the capacity of the women to adapt to disasters, right? So let's say one way, so I'm talking about the grassroots women. So, once when I wrote a book for the UN, it was mainstreaming gender program. So for them, and I studied the capacity of the women at the grassroots level, right? So the usual thing was, there was awareness programs, everything, approaches, and then when women were invited to attend meetings, etc., it was not the women, who came to the meetings. It was always the men of the, one woman, she would be elected, right, or selected or nominated, but then when it came to the meetings, it was always the men of the household who attended the meetings. I'm sure this is a common scenario in South Asia. So whenever decisions were taken, not household decisions, but outside in the communities, it was still the men who decided, right? So how do we approach that? How do we better that, right? So that is also very important. Now, talking about information channels, right? When there's disaster, when there's, when we talk about disaster in Nepal, it's basically, we don't have cyclones or hurricanes, but it's also glacier melts and droughts and then landslides. So one is information, right? How do you channel the information? Not just information, but accurate information. Okay, so again, the hottest topic for us was what you would say, the earthquake, right? The recent earthquake in Nepal. So what happened, a little outside of Kathmandu in Nuwakot, it was a Saturday, and there was this earthquake, right? The whole ground was shaking, but I was in Bangladesh at that time, not in Kathmandu. Anyways, and so the children and women, they were outside, right? Women were working, children were playing. But the when they give out information, like when agencies or women's programs, they give out information on disaster management, the children and women were told, whenever there's an earthquake, you should get under the table or under the chairs, right? So what the children did, they all ran into their houses from the fields or wherever they were and got under the chair and the tables. And the houses collapsed, the chairs broke, and they were wounded or they were killed. So what sort of information was that, right? So the information that comes out, goes down should be very, very accurate, right? Especially because we are talking to grassroots women, the children, they got the information from their mothers, right? So it should be accurate because we have to understand that the women are also not very educated, right? So you need to really spell it out to them. You have to do this, this, and this. So whenever there's an earthquake, get under the table. So therefore, they all ran inside the house to get under the table, right? So when the moderator began with, talking about roles, and then there's, we have the Himalayas, then the high mountains, the middle mountains, I don't want to go into that, and then the Siwalik range, and then the Tarai towards India. So what we see is that when there's water scarcity, right, the women, especially in Homla, between the Himalayas, Himal and the high mountains, what we see is the women, they work 17 hours a day, women of Homla. And men work 10.5 hours a day. So why is that? The gap, that difference is because the women have to fetch water. So the extra hours are just to fetch water, right? So you see the energy that is spent on that. So there should be what we would say that everybody is talking about newer technologies, right? To preserve women's energy to be used for something else, right? Not just fetching water or, other alternative means. Okay, and coming back to information again, this is in the rural area. So after the disaster, or even before the disaster, because there was this talk of earthquake. So people were giving, like agencies and women's programs, they were giving, I hope I'm not stepping on any toes, but then I'm an academic, and I like to critique. So what happened was there was suitcase when I went back, and in my home there were, like my daughter-in-law, she had little suitcases ready for any other disaster, like other aftershocks, greater aftershocks. So I just said, okay, show me what's in your suitcase. And besides the usual things, there was her passport as well, right? So I said, where are you going to go off with that passport, right? I mean, a Nepali is not going to fly away, fly off. That passport is for the foreign people who are working there, right? They need to go, and they don't want their passport to be destroyed, but not for us, right? So passport is not that important. Someone says, oh, it's already expired. That is something else. So these little things should be taken care of. And then what the moderator started off with, violence, right? Trafficking. Again, with the earthquake. I mean, we have a tradition. I think it's in South Asia, we have a tradition of trafficking, or being trafficked, right? And then with the disaster that struck, the earthquake, I mean, houses collapsed. It was terrible, even in the urban areas as well as in the rural. Like people were sleeping in open, like there were no tents until a few days later, etc. And I mean, men and women both are vulnerable at that point, right? So, okay, when the disaster struck, what happened was the households, I'm talking about individual households, even in times of droughts, let's not just do earthquake, let's say in terms of drought, or when there is, landslide, what happens to a particular household, or any households? The Asian males, they are the breadwinners, right? That's how we understand. That's how the general norm is. So they have that immediate responsibility of taking care of their family members. So what happens to them? I mean, they are also worried, right? They are also stressed. So the first thing, or the only thing that they can do is, because they've lost everything in the drought, or there's food scarcity because of, the agriculture, food scarcity. So what happens? There's forced migration. And the migration is always over to India, right? Not to China up there, but then to the southern belt over to India, right? And then, when there's this forced migration, he's not going to get a job, like after 2 days. So he may have to wait for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, right? And then there's the salary that he gets, or the wage that he gets, which he sends back, right? And in the meantime, what happens to the woman? She becomes head of the household, taking care of young children or grown-up children, elderly women, or elderly family members, parents. So there's no money, there's no food. So whatever they have, they sell off, and then they go to the slum areas, right? And that is where exploitation takes place, right? They are young, maybe the woman has young daughters, like adults, or maybe she herself is young and the children are little. So, trafficking takes place, right? So there's violence, exploitation. Men and women both are vulnerable at that time, like emotionally they are unstable. And that is the time that the traffickers come around. So, and that is what happened after the earthquake also. Men and women, the family members were vulnerable. The traffickers went around. I mean, many women, young girls were trafficked. Of course, they were caught at the border areas. But before that, I mean, there were many of them who were trafficked. And I can still talk. I'm an academic, right? I can go on for ages. So, so in other words, what I was trying to say is, it's not just at the policy, because we know there should be gender equality during policy making, there should be equity, there should be gender sensitive scientists, experts. We should have all this, right? Inclusion, social inclusion, women's inclusion, but at the same time, that awareness, everything should come down from the bottom. So then you meet halfway, right? So it cannot be just top down, or it cannot just be that awareness there at the bottom. So that's what I believe, and that's what I advocate all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you brought in a very, very comprehensive in what I know in a very short time. Before we open the session to the participants, I would like to take a concluding remark from each of the panelists based on what they have commented. My first question will be to Dilruba. You said climate change is not gender neutral. That was one of the, yeah, you said that, yeah. I mean, Sangeet, you said climate change is not gender neutral. And then you talk about control and access. Can you just...
I said climate change is not gender neutral because it impacts men and women differently. Women are more vulnerable. I mean, I don't think I need to go into the vulnerability, right? So because it impacts men and women differently, that is why it's not gender neutral. And what was the other question?
The other one is the access and the control.
Yeah, access and control. Like I'll just give a small example which I used to do, you know, like when talking to, I don't know if Drishti has heard this from me, but then, you know, like you sit in front of the television with a remote control, right? So you are with your family, and then you know you have access to that remote control, right? That remote. But do you have control? Who changes the channel, right? You have access. You can reach out to that. But can you control the channels? So that is what I mean by access and, access and control. So similarly, you know, like there was one other example I had, which, well, anyways, there was one good example I had of access and control, but it's gone out of my head.
Anyway, thank you for that. Let me ask the second question to Dilruba. You used the word information accuracy, information channels, right? No, I think it's in your speech. So I would like to ask you the question about information accuracy. I mean, when you talk about, to adapt to disaster, I mean, it's very important. How would you like to emphasize it?
Okay, in terms of the information accuracy or relevance of the information for the women, I think that's crucial. Again, the question also related to this is the access of women to information, the right information on the right time. Problem is, again, related to mobility, because women's mobility is quite limited compared to men's. So the information like early warning, for instance, doesn't reach the women adequately ahead of time. So therefore, the women can't take the preparation for the disasters. So that's one thing. And in terms of the your second point was about preparedness, yeah?
Yeah, it's all about, adapt to disaster and also the information channel, how the channel
Right.
should.
So because, again, and these two are also related, because the women's access to information, be it early warning, be it preparedness measures, is very limited. So the preparedness measures that are being taken by the women are also limited. Nowadays, a lot of NGOs are doing a lot of training programs, disaster preparedness training programs for the community, through which women are getting some information. Also, in Bangladesh, the school curriculum has, I think from class 2 onwards, the school textbooks have chapters on disaster management. So the children are getting information about how to prepare for disasters, and the children are also going back home and, disseminating those information and knowledge to their parents, and thus the women have some information. So some information is filtering through to the women, but it's not, again, the gender inequality. Men are having probably more information compared to women. And therefore, they are less able to adapt and prepare, adapt with the disasters and prepare. However, having said that, in terms of women's capacity to adapt, I think inherently is more compared to men. And this is, again, saying inherent capacity of women. So women adapt with a crisis situation, whether trained or not. We have seen that women have been able to do that. To give you an example, and this goes back to 2000, there was a big flood in the southwest of the country in 2000. And it was a sudden onrush of flood water coming from the other side of the border and flooding areas which were not used to getting flooded. And so a lot of, houses were being flushed out, food items, utensils, everything was flushed, washed away. So as a response, NGOs were giving cooked food to the families who took shelter in various flood shelters. So in the evaluation and monitoring and evaluation of that support, one point which was coming up was that women preferred non-cooked food as opposed to cooked food. And then when we asked that, why do you want non-cooked food? Because you don't have utensils and cooking fuel wood. The women said, don't worry about that, we will manage if you give us uncooked food. And here comes the strength of women, that they can adapt with any kind of situation.
Thank you. I think with time, a very small brief from Anna. I just want, when you mentioned the word leadership, I know leadership is being spoken across South Asia very highly, whether you talk about political leadership, grassroots leadership and many leadership. But when we are talking about building resilience and leadership, can you just throw a little bit light on that?
I think in building resilience, leadership is very important. Because unless the leadership decisions are actually using the gender lens, while early warning to different stages of interventions, actually it's very difficult to actually have that lens in all the stages. So if women not only participating in training courses or in early warning sessions, but it's very important if we think about resilience in disaster preparedness, then definitely we have to focus on building leadership among women. So as I was mentioning the example, if the women are in leadership position, definitely the decisions, whatever they take, definitely they will be going in favor of them. And also in accessing different services, they play a very important role. While I said that, another important thing I wanted to say as conclusion, maybe in our countries where we face disasters very often, we do have lots of good examples of how we can address disaster with gender lens. We have some examples here and there, but it's not yet actually institutionalized. I think we have to actually replicate some of the good examples, whichever works well. That is one thing. And also in different training curriculum or different training modules, we are incorporating the gender lens. But whether these things are actually helping or not, the vigilance or regular monitoring or follow-up, that also need to be monitored. And last thing I wanted to mention, that the nature of disasters are also changing. Sometimes we are maybe quite familiar with some of the disasters like flood in Bangladesh or cyclone. We are quite aware how to handle, but some of the disasters which are now approaching us like earthquake, and maybe some days we don't know the climate change aspects. So we need to learn the new techniques as well.